I wasn't supposed to find out the way I did. Not from a lawyer. Not from my brother. And certainly not from my own sister. I found out because a stranger was standing in my mother's rose garden, measuring the porch with a clipboard in his hand. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my fingers turned white. For a moment, I thought maybe I had the wrong address. Even though I had spent 47 years knowing every crack in that driveway. Every shutter my father painted himself. Every wind chime my mother hung beside the kitchen window. That house wasn't just a house. It was the only place in the world that had ever felt like home. And someone else was standing in the front yard like it belonged to them. I rolled down the window. "Excuse me," I said. The man looked up and smiled politely. "You must be the neighbor." Neighbor. I almost laughed. Instead, I said, "I'm sorry, who are you?" He checked his clipboard. "I'm with the renovation company. We're starting demolition next Monday." My stomach dropped. "Demolition?" He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. The new owners want to open up the first floor." The new owners. For a second, the world around me went completely silent. No birds. No traffic. No wind. Just those three words repeating in my head. The new owners. I stared at him. "I think you've made a mistake." He looked confused. "No, ma'am. The property closed 3 days ago." 3 days. 3 days earlier, I had been sitting in a funeral home choosing flowers for my mother's memorial service. 3 days earlier, I had been holding a folded tissue in my lap while people told me how sorry they were. 3 days earlier, my siblings had stood beside me pretending we were grieving together. And while I was burying our mother, they were selling her house. Behind my back. I didn't say another word. I just put the car in park and walked toward the front door. The man called after me. "Ma'am? You can't just go in there." I turned and looked at him. "My name is Claire Bennett." My voice shook. "I grew up in this house." His face changed instantly. And for the first time, I saw pity in his eyes. That made it worse. Because strangers always know before family admits what they've done. The front door was locked. That alone nearly broke me. For 40 years my mother never locked that door. She always said, family should never need a key. I stood there staring at the brass knob like it belonged to someone else. Then I noticed the realtor lockbox hanging from the handle. That was when it became real. Someone had listed it, photographed it, walked strangers through it, negotiated offers, signed papers, and never once called me. My younger brother, Daniel, always said he hated that house. Said it smelled old. Said the neighborhood was declining. Said the maintenance cost too much. But he still cashed the check. My sister Melissa always claimed she was too emotional to talk about inheritance. Too heartbroken. Too overwhelmed. But apparently not too heartbroken to sign the paperwork. I stepped off the porch because my knees suddenly felt weak. And right there in the driveway, the same driveway where my father taught me how to ride a bicycle, I realized something I should have understood years earlier. My siblings hadn't just betrayed me. They had been waiting for the chance. You have to understand something. I was the daughter who stayed. That matters. Especially in families like mine. Daniel moved to Arizona 20 years ago. Melissa married rich and moved to Connecticut. But I stayed in Ohio, 10 minutes from our parents. I was the one who drove Mom to her doctor appointments. I was the one who sat beside Dad during chemotherapy. I was the one who handled insurance forms. I was the one who bought groceries. I was the one who cleaned out pill boxes. I was the one who answered midnight phone calls. And after Dad died, I was the one who moved into the guest room so Mom wouldn't sleep alone. For 6 years, my life became hers. And I never complained. Not once. Because she was my mother. And because love doesn't keep score. At least mine didn't. My siblings saw things differently. To them, caregiving was my choice. Their absence was convenience. And somehow, by the time the lawyers got involved, everyone acted like we were equals. 3 children. 3 signatures. 3 shares. As if sacrifice could be divided by thirds. That night, I called Daniel first. He didn't answer. I called Melissa. Straight to voicemail. I called again. And again. Then finally my phone rang. Melissa. I answered immediately. How could you? Silence. Then a sigh. Claire. No apology. No explanation. Just my name. The way people say it when they want you calm enough to manipulate. You sold Mom's house. Please don't do this right now. Do what? Make this harder than it already is. I actually laughed. Because sometimes pain sounds like laughter before it sounds like tears. Harder? I said. You sold our home while I was planning Mom's funeral. Her voice sharpened. We didn't have a choice. You absolutely had a choice. No, Claire. We had bills. I closed my eyes. There it was. Money. It always comes down to money. Daniel's business had been failing for years. Melissa's husband had quietly lost half his investments. And suddenly the family home became less of a memory. And more of a payday. You could have called me. We knew what you'd say. Because I would have stopped you. Yes. That single word hit harder than the betrayal itself. Because it was honest. For the first time in years, my sister was telling the truth. They had hidden it because they knew I would fight. And they didn't want a fight. They wanted a signature. Preferably mine forged in silence. Did you sign my name? The line went dead quiet. My heart started pounding. Melissa. Claire. Did you sign my name? You're being dramatic. That was all the answer I needed. I sat there in my kitchen staring at the wall while 20 years of family lies suddenly rearranged themselves into something uglier. Something clearer. Because betrayal doesn't usually arrive all at once. Sometimes it shows up in tiny moments. Borrowed money never repaid. Stories that don't match. Decisions made without you. Conversations that stop when you walk into the room. And then one day, you realize it was happening all along. Have you ever been the one who gave everything to your family, only to discover you were the easiest person for them to betray? Because that was the part no one talks about. Not the money. Not the house. Not the documents. The humiliation. The realization that the people who knew your heart best used it against you. The next morning, I drove to the county records office. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. Because after 50, something changes in women. You stop begging for honesty. You start looking for proof. The woman at the records desk was kind. I handed her the address. She typed for a moment, then frowned. Property transferred 4 days ago. I need to see the deed. She printed the file and slid it across the counter. I looked down. There were 3 signatures. Daniel Bennett, Melissa Carter, and mine, Claire Bennett. My signature. Except it wasn't mine. Close enough to fool a clerk. Close enough to fool a buyer. Close enough to steal a home. But not close enough to fool me. Because no one recognizes a lie faster than the woman it was stolen from. My hands started shaking. The clerk looked at me carefully. "Ma'am?" I looked up. "That signature is forged." She went very still. "Are you certain?" I met her eyes. "Yes." And that was the moment everything changed. Because a family betrayal is one thing. But fraud? Fraud leaves a paper trail. And paper trails can bury people. I thought that would be the worst part. I was wrong. Because 2 hours later, I found something far worse than a forged signature. Something hidden inside the sale file. Something no one thought I would notice. Tucked behind the transfer paperwork was a handwritten note from the buyer's attorney. Just one sentence. One sentence that made my blood run cold. It read, "Seller disclosed contents of attic excluded from sale as previously agreed." I stared at those words over and over. Contents of attic. Excluded from sale. Previously agreed. My mother's attic. No one had been in that attic for years. Not since Dad died. And suddenly I knew. My siblings hadn't just sold the house. They were hiding something inside it. Something valuable enough to keep secret. And whatever it was, they thought I would never find it. But they forgot one thing. I knew that house better than they ever did. And if they had hidden something there, I already knew exactly where to look. And when I climbed those attic stairs the next night, I found something behind the old cedar wall panel that made me realize my mother had known this day was coming. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, watching shadows move across the walls. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that sentence again. Contents of attic excluded from sale. Not personal belongings. Not boxes. Not family items. Contents. Legal wording. Careful wording. The kind of wording people use when they know exactly what they are protecting. And the more I thought about it, the more one question kept circling in my mind. Why would my brother and sister risk forging my signature? Unless whatever was hidden in that attic was worth more than the house itself? By 3 in the morning, I stopped pretending I was going to sleep. By 4, I had made a decision. I was going back. At 6:30 the next morning, the neighborhood was still quiet. The kind of quiet that only exists in older neighborhoods where people wake early but move slowly. I parked 2 streets over. Not in front of the house. Not where anyone might remember my car. And as I walked toward the place I once called home, the cold morning air felt sharper than it should have. Maybe because grief changes the temperature of everything. The house looked different now. Not physically. The same white shutters. The same brick steps. The same wind chime hanging by the porch. But it no longer looked like a home. It looked like evidence. I stood across the street for a long moment, staring at the upstairs window. The attic window. Small. Square. Dusty. The same one I used to climb through when I was 16 and sneaking in after curfew. Funny how the things your mother once scolded you for become useful later. I almost smiled at that. Almost. Then I crossed the street. The side gate still stuck halfway. Just like it had for 20 years. You had to lift it slightly before it would swing open. That tiny detail hit me harder than I expected. Because betrayal is strange. Sometimes it's not the big thing that breaks you. Sometimes it's realizing your body still remembers a place your heart no longer recognizes. I moved quietly along the side of the house. Past my mother's hydrangeas. Past the basement window. Past the cracked stone where Dad dropped a toolbox in 1998 and never fixed the mark. Every inch of that house still held pieces of my life. And now I was sneaking into it like a criminal. My own family had turned me into an intruder. The old wooden ladder was still behind the shed. Exactly where Dad always kept it. I dragged it carefully across the grass, trying not to let the metal scrape too loudly. Then I leaned it beneath the attic window. For a moment, I just stood there staring up. 48 years old. Widowed. Exhausted. Climbing into my childhood home through a second-story window because my own brother and sister had sold it out from under me. If someone had told me a week earlier this would be my life, I would have laughed in their face. But grief introduces you to versions of yourself you never imagined. I climbed. Slowly. Quietly. My hands shook with every rung. Not from fear. From anger. Because anger and heartbreak live in the same place sometimes. And if you're not careful, one turns into the other before you even notice. The attic window wasn't locked. That surprised me. But then I realized something. Daniel never remembered details. And Melissa never noticed them. They had probably assumed no one would ever come back. That no one would care enough. That no one would question them. They forgot I was the daughter who always came back. I pushed the window upward. Dust fell onto my sweater. The old wood groaned softly. Then I slipped inside. And suddenly I was standing in the attic again. The smell hit first. Cedar. Dust. Old paper. A faint trace of lavender. My mother always tucked lavender sachets into storage boxes. She said memories should smell beautiful. I stood frozen for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the dim light. Nothing had changed. Old trunks lined the wall. Christmas decorations sat in faded plastic bins. My father's fishing rods leaned in the corner. Boxes marked. Photos. Christmas. Mom's china. Dad's records. And for one foolish second, I almost believed I had imagined everything. Maybe the note meant nothing. Maybe grief had made me paranoid. Maybe there was no secret. Maybe my siblings were greedy, yes, but not calculating. Then I saw the cedar panel, and my stomach dropped. Because one wall looked newer than the others. Just one section. Maybe 3 feet wide. The wood was slightly lighter. The nails cleaner. Barely noticeable. Unless you knew the house. Unless you knew that wall had never looked like that before. I walked toward it slowly. And whispered out loud to the empty attic. What did you hide? My fingers traced the edge of the panel. And there it was. A tiny gap near the bottom. Not enough for anyone to notice casually. But enough to pry. I looked around until I found an old flathead screwdriver in one of Dad's toolboxes. Then I slid it into the seam. Pushed. The wood resisted. I pushed harder. The panel popped loose with a dull crack. And what I saw behind it made my knees almost give out. Because hidden inside the wall, neatly stacked in waterproof plastic cases, were dozens of sealed envelopes. Rows of them. Labeled by year. Some dating back nearly 20 years. And beneath them, a small black lockbox. I just stared. My heart pounding so hard it felt painful. Because suddenly every terrible possibility became real. My mother had hidden something. And whatever it was, she had hidden it from her own children. My hands trembled as I pulled out the first envelope. On the front, in my mother's handwriting, were 4 words. For Claire. If needed. I couldn't breathe for a second. Just those words. Simple. Careful. As if she had known. As if somewhere deep down, my mother understood exactly what her children would become after she was gone. I sat down on the attic floor. Cross-legged like a child. Holding that envelope in both hands. And for the first time since the funeral, I cried. Not because of the house. Not because of the betrayal. Because even after death, my mother had still tried to protect me. Inside the envelope was a letter. 3 pages. Written in blue ink. Her handwriting slightly shakier than I remembered. But unmistakably hers. I unfolded the paper. And I read. Claire. If you are reading this, then something happened exactly the way I feared it would. I stopped. My hands shook so badly the paper rattled. I kept reading. You were always the one who stayed. And because you stayed, you saw things your brother and sister never did. You saw who I really was after your father died. You saw how scared I became. And you saw what money does to people who think they deserve more than they earned. Tears blurred the page. I wiped them away and kept going. I need you to know that what I am leaving behind is not equal, because love is not always Equal. Sometimes love looks like gratitude, and gratitude deserves honesty. I stopped breathing. Then I turned the page. And that was when I saw the sentence that changed everything. The house was never the true inheritance. I whispered the words out loud. The house was never the true inheritance. My entire body went cold. Because in that instant, I knew. My siblings hadn't just sold the house. They had sold the least valuable thing my mother owned. And they didn't even know it. Under the letter was a second document. Then a third. Then a fourth. Bank statements. Trust papers. Investment records. Property documents. And as I spread them across the attic floor, the truth unfolded in front of me piece by piece. For 22 years, my mother had quietly invested money from my father's business royalties. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. And by the time she died, the hidden account had grown to over $1.8 million. I stared at the number, again and again, certain I was reading it wrong. But I wasn't. My mother had hidden nearly $2 million, and no one knew. Except her. And now me. I pressed my hand against my mouth to keep from making a sound. Because suddenly everything made sense. The forged signature. The rushed sale. The attic exclusion. They knew something was there. But they didn't know what. They had been searching blindly, trying to find what my mother left behind. And in their greed, they had handed me the very thing they were desperate to steal. Then I opened the black lockbox. And what was inside was even worse. 3 photographs. An old key. And one final sealed envelope. This one marked, "Do not open unless they betray her." My heart stopped. Because there was only one person her could mean. Me. My mother had known. She had known they might betray me. And she had prepared for it. But what terrified me most was what she planned for me to discover next. And as I held that final envelope in my hands, staring at my mother's handwriting, one question kept echoing in my mind. What could she possibly know that I don't? Because if the money wasn't the real inheritance, and the house was never the prize, then whatever was inside that envelope was something my brother and sister would do anything to keep buried. I didn't open it. Not yet. Because some truths don't just change your life. They destroy everything you thought you knew about your family. And I had a feeling, once I read those final words, there would be no going back. If you think this ends with money, you're wrong. Because what I discovered next wasn't just about betrayal, it was about a secret my family had been hiding for decades. Subscribe now, because episode 2 will change everything.
Thanking you for watching Revenge Echo channel. Like, subscribe and comment where you are watching from.